Thank you, and thank you all for being here today and assisting us with this investigation. They're giving me a document book there because I'm going to ask about document number 48 and 49 in my first question. You know, we've seen the photos, and I think the chairman and Mr. Walden and others, and we've all had those photos of the dead rodents and other filthy conditions at PCA. And you've heard what government investigators found when they went in to shut down these facilities: roaches, salmonella contamination, and so much rodent excrement that they couldn't really quantify how much there was. And I've read your statements, and I've listened to you here closely this morning, and essentially what you're all saying is that you didn't know about these problems at PCA. But my question is, why didn't you know? I mean, I understand there was the audit firm AIB that inspected PCA and gave it very high ratings of excellent or superior, but yet in our investigation we find AIB gives 98% of everyone they inspect superior or excellent ratings. But the companies, you didn't do your own inspections like Nestle did, and therefore you didn't find the problems. So in the audits there, if you look at number 48 and 49, if you'd like, they're in the document binder. First one, 48, is 2002 Nestle USA sent auditors to the PCA facility in Georgia where they found, quote, the potential for microbiological cross-contamination because of raw peanuts being handled in the peanut roasting area. They found rodent droppings in the break room cabinets, live flower beetle activity, and dead insects. Ultimately, they concluded in 2002, Nestle did, PCA was not in compliance with critical standards for housekeeping, sanitation, pest control, and they found PCA had no plan to address salmonella. Nestle USA then went in 2006 at the invite to go to PCA in Texas in 2006 and found a failure to comply with pathogen monitoring and pest control standards. According to the tab 49, the 206 report, the auditors counted over 50 mouse or rat carcasses, concluding that the facility had, quote, a serious ongoing problem with rodents. As a result of these deficiencies, Nestle said no in 2002. In 2006, again, they said no and rejected PCA as a supplier, that they wouldn't buy peanut products from them. The difference, it seems, that Nestle didn't rely solely on an auditor that was selected by PCA and paid by PCA, which is an obvious conflict of interest. It conducted its own audits with its own experienced staff. So let me ask each of you today, why didn't you do the same? You all talked about safety is the number one concern, family-owned companies, you're doing everything you can to assure the safety, but it seems like you passed that responsibility to somebody else. So why wouldn't you have done the same thing if this is your supplier of a critical ingredient? Why wouldn't you go check it? Mr. Cannon, you want to start with you?
Thank you, Congressman. First, when we started out in the relationship, we required spec sheets from them. We relied on the FDA. That's supposed to be doing that. They certainly come visit us. We run a very clean shop and organization. They're very well known in the industry. We had a continuing pure food guarantee from them. Throughout the relationship, we continued to ask for more things, like HACCP plans. We believe they had a HACCP plan in place. And we had COA showing negative results for salmonella by the end.
Right, I know.
We were outraged.
But why didn't you guys go check? If this is your main supplier to provide your peanut butter, they're putting your name on this, what, 5-pound pail and then up to 35 pounds and goes to like nursing homes. Why didn't you go check?
We were a distributor of this. I understand our name was on it, but we bought a closed container. And that's where we have to look at today. We have got to start with the manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers down the line.
Okay, I'll follow that up with a question. Kellogg's, you're a big company like Nestle, and I was surprised you guys didn't at least have someone there, internal audits.
Yeah, I think as we said in our written, but I'll go through it, we use a multi-step process. The third-party audit.
Can you pull your mic up a little bit, Mr. Mackay?
The third-party audit is one step in that. We also do risk analysis of ingredients. We bring the product into our labs to run it through our facilities, make sure it works, so we get first-hand experience with that, and we do get certificates of analysis.
Yeah, but do you send people out to these plants?
Some we do, some we don't. The practicality is when you look at Kellogg, even as a big company, we have 3,000 ingredients, 1,000 suppliers. I think it's common industry practice to use a third party. If you look at the situation here, AIB is the most commonly used auditor in the US. The AIB, as one of many factors we use, is meaningful. The AIB audit confirmed several important food safety measures were in place at PCA. They had an environmental testing program. They did all microbiological finished.
But you didn't send anyone down, or like Nestle, like to check PCA, right? You didn't send anyone down to Kellogg's then?
We didn't at that point, but we have since, as a learning coming out of this, changed our
Okay, I'm going to follow that up with a question, because you all got different standards here now on what you're doing. That's my next question. Ms. Isley, any comment on that? You guys didn't send anyone? You're the family-owned one that health is your concern. Did you guys send anyone to PCA in Texas or?
We did not send anyone. Sorry, Chairman.
That's right.
I'm not used to this. I'm from small family-run business. Sorry. A little bit nervous today.
That's okay.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, we did not send anyone to PCA. One of the things that, as a small family-run business of a chain of retail stores, we have 1,300 suppliers of product to our stores for the 25,000 products that we sell in our stores.
Sure, but some of your products, like how animals are being treated, and that, you said in your testimony you guys go send inspectors out, so I thought maybe you'd go to PCA.
Yes, we do, and I can comment on that now to explain the difference for us, is that we rely upon the government system and the good manufacturing practices.
Well, did you ever check with the government on Texas? Because you were getting it from Plainview, Texas, and Texas wasn't even registered. So did you check with Texas or the FDA to see if the place was even on anyone's radar screen, registered with anyone to produce food?
No, we did not. We try to rely upon the system in the United States. We purposefully source our product from companies that manufacture in the United States because of the gold standard of manufacturing practices that do exist in this country.
Well,
what I was trying to say about the inspections for humane treatment of animals is when there is not a government system in place, we do go out of our way to make sure that we inspect that what is on those labels
sure,
is accurate and true.
But all due respect, in this case, because you get yours from Plainview, Texas, you didn't even check to see if it was even registered, the operation. So even if government was doing its job, if you would have checked it, you would have found that this Plainview, Texas place, which has all the dead rodents in it, wasn't even registered, never registered or inspected by Texas or the FDA. Let me ask this question. This is a June 2000 audit report from the Inspector General to the Health and Human Services, and I've been on this committee now 15 years. I'm sure Mr. Dingle and Mr. Waxman, who've been on longer than this, know how many years we've been trying to get standards. You've all talked about all the things you're going to do now, and I compliment you on trying to do some things. But we can't have Kellogg's doing one thing, Mr. Ken doing something else, Ms. Isley, your company doing something else. Don't you think it's about time we have some standards as to what we look for when we go to these plants? We were baffled last time that the state inspectors didn't pick up some things in the Georgia plant that were structurally wrong, that encourage, not discourage, cross-contamination. Don't you think it's about time we have either federal standards, international standards, since a lot of our food comes overseas, or at least CDC, NIH, some kind of standards that we all got to play by for inspections, testing of food in food processing place, because you're all doing something different, and they're not going to mesh.
Congressman, I think one of the recommendations we made was that we actually develop consistent food manufacturer audit standards.
Number 7, yeah, that was sort of like your standard number 7, but who should be in charge of that?
You know, I think if you start with the first recommendation we made, which was forming a single food safety authority within HHS, and then having an advisory group that actually works for them on a scientific base. The reason for that is there are so many moving parts here that we need to bring the science to bear. Industry can work with that group to ensure that we are looking at the right standards for varying food facilities.
It claims they've been doing that for years, way back to June of 2002, and never gets done. Either industry or someone doesn't want to cooperate.
I think we're all here to try and work with you to encourage that, we do move forward and make that change and we establish those standards, and I think there are a number of things we need to do consistent with that. The other recommendation we have in here is that on high-risk foods that the FDA actually does an annual audit, and within the context of that annual audit, that all of the testing done by that facility is shared with the FDA when they go in and do that annual audit.
Okay.
It doesn't fix for this unfortunate situation, but it certainly should enhance the food safety in the US going forward.
Sure, I mean, high risk, I mean, we did the same thing in 97, now here we are again in, 2007, we had the one in Georgia, and here we are 2 years later, same thing. Mr. Walden, for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm glad you raised that issue of the IG report. Mr. Barton and I sent a letter to the FDA last week requesting documents and information on whether FDA has implemented the Inspector General's recommendations and how the FDA is implementing them. And again, this goes back to June of 2000. So we've got some work to do on our end to make sure that the FDA is looking at these state controls on inspections and what's happening out there when they do delegate it out. So I hope you'll help us in trying to get answers out of the FDA, Mr. Chairman, because I concur with your analysis on its lack of implementation. I've got a couple of just sort of yes and no questions for you initially, and then a couple that'll go into a little more depth. Do you support uniform standards for third-party auditors, including standardized questions and formats, and government accreditation of these third-party audit firms?
Yes.
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 Thank you. And one of the things that's concerned me is, and it came out in some of the testimony today, when I was in the broadcast business, I was regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. The inspector chose when he or she was going to show up to look at my public file, go out and look at my tower, review my equipment, have my operator show they could do an emergency alert test. They didn't call ahead of time to say, a week from Thursday I'm going to come out. Do you support third-party audits being announced or unannounced?
I support them being unannounced.
Mr. McKay?
I think as long as the logistics can work for unannounced, because there are so many audits that are going to be conducted, at some point maybe you've got to give at least a day's notice or some notice. But if it helps the system by just going in unannounced, then we would support that.
Ms. Isley?
We support unannounced.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your answers to those questions. They're helpful. Did your company receive a certificate of analysis or some representation from PCA that the peanut products sold by Peanut Corporation of America to your company were safe?
We have in the past, yes.
Yes, on every batch we got in, we had a certificate of analysis, and all of them were negative.
No, we did not.
You did not. Okay. And did you seek those certificates or
not? We did not seek those certificates as a retailer.
You're more of a retailer. You're buying product to resell.
We're buying product to resell, and so we don't seek those certificate analysis on the food side. We really try to work with the system that exists.
Okay. Mr. McKay, I have before me do you know what tab that is in? I guess it's not in the document book. Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd ask that this document be put in the record. It's one.
That's the certificate of analysis. No objection.
And this is the one dated July 12th of 2007 from Peanut Corporation of America to Kellogg's regarding coarse natural peanut paste, lot number 7192 CNPB as in boy. And under the microbiological data, it shows results as negative for Salmonella. My understanding is that this certificate says negative, and yet this is one of the lots that showed positive on Salmonella. Do you
I can't confirm on the lot, but I know that we went back and checked every certificate of analysis we'd received from PCA. Every certificate of analysis was negative, and I think that just highlights how extremely difficult it is when you've got an unethical and dishonest supplier to actually manage for this.
And do you think that the records that from these independent labs that do the analysis to see if there's a problem with the product, do you think those records, A, should be available upon inspection by the FDA?
I think any finished food records that show a positive, it could be helpful to actually present those to the FDA.
Ms. Isley?
We would agree with that.
Yes.
Cannon? Because one of our hearings, it came out that I guess they have to go through the Bioterrorism Act in order to get access to these records, and that just seems preposterous to me. I don't understand it. Do you think these ought to be electronically reported to the FDA when there is a positive hit?
That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be the best course.
Yes, that would help us.
And do you think that there ought to be a requirement for this kind of testing to occur and for audits to occur?
Let me understand your question again, Congressman, a little bit fuller. You're asking, do you think that mandatory testing should be required? On what kind of testing? Salmonella?
You know, I'm not an expert in the field. I'd seek your counsel and others
absolutely.
that are in the biological field.
I agree with you. I think that would be very helpful to have mandatory testing on requirements that somebody says should be, you know, peanut butter salmonella, for example.
You know, I would clearly support if a lab finds a positive test on finished food, they give that to the FDA. One of the things that I think it's critical when you understand the system is that the prevention is really the key to very strong food safety. And to prevent, environmental testing becomes one of the key steps in that, which is done much further upstream. Most companies that do environmental testing, as we do in all of our facilities, if we were to find any issue, we would take preventative action to prevent it actually getting into the food stream. So the only reason I raise that, Congressman, is the complexity. If you ask for every test, environmental as well as finished food, you potentially could overwhelm the system and the FDA, and it may be impractical. I'm not trying to be defensive, but it's...
No, that's, I'm seeking your input because we don't want to shut down the food chain. We want it to be safe.
Yeah.
And which you really lead into my next point. These very dramatic and disgusting photos that we have came about not from the third-party auditors, is my understanding, and this is out of the Texas plant for PCA, that show the, you know, the dead rodents and the feathers and God only knows what else. This came about because of an inspection. Excuse me, an investigation. And my understanding is that in your industry, when there's an audit, it's maybe a day long. And the company picks the auditor and they can pre-announce that they're coming, and so they don't get into potentially into the detail level that an investigation that can go 3 or 4 days might actually get into, and it was the result of an investigation that found this. So should audits be longer? Should they be more on the investigative side?
With third-party audits, Congressman, they're at least a day or more at our facilities. FDA is a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours.
And that's FDA inspection, but what about investigation? Have you ever had one of those?
An actual investigation?
Right.
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, Mr. McKay?
No, I think it's rather than, one of the differentials here is on inspections, I think if you've got a high-risk facility or food ingredient, our recommendation, and we've already made this change internally, is to have a multifunctional team. Typically, they would take longer than a day, but even if it's a day, you've got 3-4 people versus one person, and you have experts in a variety of different areas, so they're actually doing as good a scan as possible. We've said in one of the recommendations we've made that we believe that food safety plans should be developed for all facilities in the U.S.
Now I have one more question. I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence. Ms. Isley here is a retailer. Could be any store in America. If she came to your company, Mr. McKay, and said, I need to see tests, I need to see all these things before I'll sell your product, how would that work? Is that even, do retailers come to you and demand that?
Yes, they do, and sometimes retailers will demand a specific type of audit.
And how do you respond if it's Walmart or a big chain, I'm not picking on Walmart, but a pretty big buyer with a lot of horsepower versus a small independent?
For us, it wouldn't matter. Within the context of our facilities, we have standardized audits that comply with almost every criteria that retailers would ask for.
Is that the same, Mr. Kanan, for you?
Yeah, I mean, if a retailer came to us to ask us for our audit, it's all standardized. We would be able to give them.
And you do that? Do retailers come to you and ask that on a regular basis?
Some do.
Okay.
Many don't.
So regardless of size. they could ask you for that.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Waxman, for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKay, you indicated you had a certificate of analysis showing that there was no salmonella in the batch that you were buying from the Peanut Corporation of America. As I understand, a certificate of analysis is no guarantee that there's no salmonella. It's they tested it, but it doesn't, and where they tested there was no salmonella, but there could be in the tub some other place where there might be salmonella, and it turned out to your misfortune that it was an unscrupulous supplier that was providing this this batch of peanuts to you. But you indicated in your written statement that that you say that there was an audit finding that reported no concern that the facility may have had any pathogen-related issues or any potential contamination. And I'm quoting from your written statement. I want to direct your attention to a March 2008 AIB audit report for PGA's Georgia facility. And in this audit report, we know AIB is the group that did the audit for PCA. In this audit report, it says the following: this facility had evaluated the processes and procedures and determined that no critical control points were present in the operation. No critical control points. Now, that to me is, when we talk about a HACCP, there has to be a plan. There has to be a plan for preventing salmonella. And they're saying there were no critical control points. Now, obvious critical control point would be the roaster, because a roaster can kill the salmonella. So if most manufacturers would very much see the peanut roasting stage a critical control point. But this audit said to you there are no critical control points. This means PCA looked at its peanut manufacturing process, it looked at all of its procedures, and it determined they didn't have any critical control points, not even for killing salmonella. Did you have a reaction when you saw that in the audit, or did you even notice it? Don't you think that PCA should have designated killing salmonella at the roasting stage as a critical control point?
Firstly, I didn't see that particular audit. I think the audit I referenced, when we'd gone through as part of our multi-step process and looked at the third-party audit and looked at what AIB had given us in that audit, that they had quantified that they did have a food safety plan in place. So, and my belief is, and one of the recommendations here is that we should codify that all plants should have a food safety plan in place, because really that's the key.
Well, we need to do that. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. We need to do that for the future. But in this case, you were relying on PCA to have this third-party audit. They had a third-party auditor who, in my view, clearly had a conflict of interest. They wanted to give PCA an audit that PCA would like. In fact, they even gave PCA an award that they knew PCA would like, saying they were superior in their quality, even though we know that that's not the case. So if the audit was sent to you and said PCA didn't even have critical control points, that audit was telling you at Kellogg that PCA did not have a plan to effectively kill salmonella. You know, peanuts are a high-risk product for salmonella. So I'm sure you're aware, and all of you are aware, that there needs to be a clear plan to make sure that salmonella is stopped. And I think that PCA was a bad company. They did bad things, and they were clearly ignorant, because they wanted to be ignorant. But this indicates to me that Kellogg was pretty sloppy. You were just taking things for granted that PCA was going to do the right thing. They gave you a report of their inspector. They hired the cheapest inspector they could possibly get. I think they paid this inspector maybe $1,500. There are more thorough inspections. It would have cost more money. The gold standard is a $20,000 inspection. Well, I guess everyone should realize that they would have been better off spending $20,000 than going on the cheap, because it's $70 million, I believe, is the loss for all of this as a result of their going on the faith that everything was going to be okay, without making sure they could stop salmonella and stop this sort of thing from happening. Do you think that you were sloppy?
Congressman, I think we did everything we could do. When we looked at our multi-step process, the third-party audit was a key part of it, but we did a risk analysis assessment. We did actually take the product in and check it through our labs, and then we relied on certificate of analysis. And as I mentioned, you know, managing for an unethical, dishonest supplier who is prepared to actually put people's lives at risk is something, as we've stepped back and learned from this, means that we have already changed our process. And that's why we're here trying to work with you to say there are a number of things we believe we need to do.
Let me tell you, there were some red flags that you should have noticed. I think you should have noticed that statement in the audit that said they didn't have the critical points. You didn't do what Nestle did. You didn't send your own people to the plant to inspect it. You relied on what ordinarily, I guess, would have been okay. But you didn't do that extra step that I hope will now require to make sure that there is a process to prevent salmonella. And in that regard, I must differ with you. I think Kellogg was sloppy. I think PCA was bad. And I think the whole thing has resulted in a tragedy that could have been prevented. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dingell, for questions, please. We're just starting votes, but let's get some questions in.
Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, I'm going to ask a series of questions that will require only a yes or a no answer. We will start with you, Mr. Cannon, and go across to Mr. Mackey and then Ms. Isley. First, do your companies have best practices in place to ensure the safety of the products you receive from suppliers? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you, Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Ms. Isley?
Yes.
All right. Do these best practices include on-site audits of sanitary conditions and processing techniques of suppliers prior to and during your contractual relationship with them? Yes or no?
No.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Ms. Isley?
Sometimes.
Do I get to say sometimes, Mr. Dingell? I thought it was a yes or no.
I've got to do it that way because we have a very short amount of time. Did, ladies and gentlemen, again, did representatives from your companies inspect sanitary conditions and processing practices of Peanut Company of America prior to your company contracting with that company as a supplier? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, I have to hear your question again.
Did representatives from your companies inspect sanitary conditions and processing techniques of Peanut Company of America prior to contracting with PCA as a supplier? Yes or no?
No.
We relied on industry practice.
I'm sorry?
We relied on industry practice. No.
Okay. Ms. Isley?
No.
Did representatives from your companies inspect sanitary conditions and processing techniques of PCA while it was contracted as a supplier of peanut products to your companies?
I'm just having a hard time hearing you. I'm hearing noise
I'm
over
doing
there.
my best. Did representatives from your companies inspect sanitary conditions and processing techniques from PCA while it was contracted as a supplier of peanut products to your companies?
We relied on industry standards as well, so no.
Likewise, we relied on industry standards and certificate of analysis.
Ms. Isley?
We also relied upon industry standards, and no, we did not inspect.
Now, prior to the outbreak of Salmonella called by PCA's products, were your companies aware of the unsanitary conditions present in PCA's processing facilities?
No.
No, we were not.
No, we are not informed.
So what in effect you did was to rely on Food and Drug Administration's inspections and on industry practices to see to it essentially that you got safe products and you were taken advantage of. Is that not so?
That is not so. We required specification sheets. We believe the FDA was inspecting it and they were doing their jobs. We required continuing pure food guarantees. So I'd have to disagree with you on that.
You know, I think as we've talked, third-party audit, certificates of analysis, we had an unethical and dishonest supplier. I'm perfectly unclear as how you manage for someone who's prepared to put consumers at risk.
Ms. Isley?
Representative Mr. Dingle, was the question, did we feel that we were taken advantage?
Well, you were taken advantage of by a bunch of sharpshooters who didn't do a decent job.
Yes.
And you relied on Food and Drug, and you relied on industry practices to see to it you were safe.
We do.
I don't find fault in you in that. I think you're entitled to do it, but I think you found yourself in a bad position because the law did not provide you and the rest of industry and consumers the protections they needed. Now, would an up-to-date registry of all food facilities operating in the U.S. or importing food into the United States have helped FDA to identify and respond more quickly to the Salmonella outbreak caused by PCA's products? Yes or no?
Sir, every time you speak, I seem to get interference. It was your question that required registration of facilities?
Up-to-date registration of all
absolutely.
facilities. Mr.
Yes,
Mackey?
all facilities should be registered.
Ms. Isley?
Yes.
Now, I believe food processors should have to notify the FDA when they begin producing products that they had not previously registered. Do you agree? In other words, that's a part of having an up-to-date registry of processors and the state of the processing that comes into your plants.
The way I understand your question is I believe that every food facility should be registered no matter in the country.
And it ought to be registered for all the products that they ship.
That's correct.
Mr. Mackey?
Well, I'm not sure the system actually exists, so I'm not sure you can rely on
It doesn't exist, and I'm asking whether you think that that would be a protection to you.
Well, at the moment, we wouldn't know whether a plant was registered or not because I don't think it's mandatory.
Ms. Isley?
Yes, we would support it because we believe it would help protect small businesses like ours, particularly if there was a way to communicate whether or not people were in compliance.
Do you believe that Food and Drug has the resources and the ability to carry out its responsibilities in assuring that product reaching your places of business and arriving ultimately at the consumer's doorstep are safe? Yes or no?
Do I believe they have the resources is the question?
Yes.
I think they have the resources, they just need to refocus.
Question is, do they have them? Yes.
I believe I answered your question.
I'm sorry?
I believe I answered your question.
I'd just like you to tell me yes or no. They have the resources to do the job or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
You think they do?
No, I do
Mackey?
not believe they do. I believe that's one of the
I'm
reasons
sorry?
why no, I do not believe they do. I think that's one of the reasons why we're here today.
Ms. Isley?
We do not believe that they have the resources necessary.
Now, would better traceback capabilities have helped to FDA to mitigate or to prevent this salmonella outbreak?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
It's a difficult one. I believe they could have.
Okay. Ms. Isley?
Yes.
Now, should testing on food products and examination and visits and investigation of plants that are shipping products in interstate commerce be subject to safety requirements and be performed only by a laboratory accredited by FDA? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes, I believe labs should be accredited by the FDA.
Ms. Isley?
Yes.
Could this crisis have been mitigated if testing laboratories had been required to send their testing results to FDA?
No.
Mr. Mackey?
No, I think it's impossible to manage for an unethical and dishonest supplier.
Ms. Isley?
It's difficult to answer the question.
All right.
I don't believe that it would unless there was some form of communication to businesses that may be in receipt of products that had tested positive.
So you all three are of the view that FDA doesn't need to receive the results of the investigation and the testing of the testing laboratories. Is that correct?
No, that's not true because that was not your question.
Okay. Should FDA have the authority to issue mandatory recalls of tainted foods?
Yes, but I have a comment on that, if I may.
I don't have time. Mr. Mackey?
Yes, I would fully support that.
Ms. Isley?
Yes, we support that.
Now, we've agreed that the companies do not, rather that the Food and Drug does not have the resources to do the job. Do your companies support or oppose mandating registration fees with which to fund increased inspections by FDA? Starting with you, Mr. Keenan.
You're calling me here to ask my opinions, and I don't feel like I'm able to.
Yes.
Am I here for your opinion or for a yes or a no answer?
I just want to hear. Do you agree that they should have or they should not have?
So I'll have you ask me that question again.
I'm sorry?
I need to have that question again.
Do your companies support or oppose mandating registration fees with which to fund increased inspections by FDA?
We would not be opposed.
Mr. Mackey?
We would support coming up with the appropriate way to improve the U.S. food safety system and finding a way to fund it, and I think industry would support that. A lot more discussion would need to take place as to exactly what that might mean.
Thank you. Ms. Isley?
I think that we would be in support of it, and I agree with Mr. Mackey's comments that we have to investigate it, particularly to look at its impact on small businesses.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Dingell.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gett for questions?
Thank you, Mr.
We've got
Chairman.
4 minutes. If others want to go vote,
I'll
we'll try
just
to hold it for a bit.
have a couple of questions because I can't come back, and I appreciate
Okay.
your indulgence. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Keenan, do you support the 9 principles that Mr. McKay said that we should adopt to improve our food safety system in this country?
From what I heard, Mr. Gett, I do support it very much.
Thank you. Ms. Isley?
Yes, we support that.
And I want to ask both of you, I want to start with Mr. Keenan. Have the sales of your company suffered as a result of being tied to PCA?
We haven't fully had a chance to analyze it yet.
What about you, Ms. Isley?
I would say that we have not. We have been, the second that there was any possible association or problem, we immediately pulled the product because we were concerned for the health and welfare of our customers.
Do you think the confidence of your customers would be increased if we improved all of these food safety standards that we've been talking about today?
Absolutely.
What about you, Mr. Keenan?
Yes, absolutely.
What about you, Mr. McKay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything we can do to strengthen confidence in the food safety system in the U.S. is going to be worth doing.
And let me start with you, Mr. Keenan. Now, we're hoping and we're intending to pass comprehensive food safety legislation this year. But barring that, you've got a financial interest in your company in improving the safety of the food that you receive. Are you doing that?
Are we?
Are you instituting practices that will improve the oversight of the food that you're?
Yes, we are.
And what about you, Ms. Isley?
Yes, we are.
Can you delineate for me some of the specific things that you're doing?
On the food side of our business, we have started a quality questionnaire that is in accordance with some of the Grocery Manufacturers Association's good manufacturing practices to do audits and make sure that any of our vendors are following those good manufacturing practices. We are also, particularly in respect to the peanut products, roasted peanuts that we receive, we are testing for salmonella and requiring a certificate of analysis that it is free of salmonella.
And do you think you might expand that for other types of at-risk products?
Yes. So
now you said you have how many suppliers?
We have 1,300 suppliers.
1,300 suppliers. And what were your gross revenues last year?
Our gross revenues last year were close to $200 million.
$200 million. Now, do you have the financial ability to go out and inspect all of those 1,300 suppliers?
No, we do not.
And so what percentage of those do you think you can inspect?
What percentage of those?
Yeah, because you said you're inspecting some meat suppliers and
Yes,
others.
we do. We inspect our meat suppliers that make our animal suppliers for humane treatment of animals, cage-free, range, grass-fed, access to pasture.
Right,
Those
I
types of
understand
things.
that. Do you think it would be worthwhile for business reasons and also your consumers' health to expand that to inspections in some of the more at-risk areas like peanuts?
We would like to see that in the food supply arena, that the government systems that you're discussing putting in place, that they work. If you're asking in the interim period, what is our intent? Yes, we intend to be more vigilant. I don't know what percentage we'll be able to visit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Gett. Our time is up and for votes too, so I guess we better hustle to the floor. We're going to recess till how about 12:15? We got 3 votes on the floor. We should be back. We get back here at 12:15 promptly. We can finish up this panel and finish up this hearing before the next series of votes. So we'll stand in recess till 12:15.